In labor adjudication, consistency is not treated as a moral value. It is treated as evidence. Decision-makers do not ask whether an employer acted kindly, reasonably, or sympathetically. They ask whether the disciplinary system produced predictable outcomes when applied to comparable conduct. Authority in discipline does not arise from the correctness of a single decision. It arises from the reliability of the process that produces decisions. Where outcomes vary without explanation, authority collapses. Inconsistency is therefore not evaluated as an abstract fairness concern. It is evaluated as a structural defect in the disciplinary system itself. A system that cannot account for its own deviations is presumed unreliable. Unreliability undermines credibility. Loss of credibility invites intervention. For this reason, decision-makers do not rehabilitate inconsistent outcomes. They invalidate them. Consistency functions as a threshold requirement. Where it exists, authority is presumed. Where it is absent, authority is interrogated. In disciplinary proceedings, the comparison is not theoretical. It is empirical. Decision-makers examine how similar misconduct has been treated across time, roles, and circumstances. They assess whether comparable conduct resulted in comparable sanctions. Uniformity does not require identical outcomes. It requires a rational and defensible basis for differentiation. Differentiation is tolerated only where it can be objectively explained. Factors such as prior disciplinary records, degrees of participation, or materially different consequences may justify divergence. Absent such explanation, differentiation is treated as arbitrariness. Arbitrariness is incompatible with disciplinary authority. The burden of explaining inconsistency does not rest indefinitely with the employee. Once inconsistency is credibly raised, the obligation shifts. The employer must account for the deviation. Silence, omission, or post hoc rationalization is insufficient. Consistency is therefore evaluated as a system property, not an employee entitlement. This evaluation is closely linked to evidentiary sufficiency. Decision-makers apply the civil standard of proof. Misconduct must be established on a balance of probabilities. This standard does not relax the employer's evidentiary burden. It structures it. Evidence is weighed, not counted. Decision-makers assess credibility, reliability, and probability as an integrated exercise. Demeanor alone is not decisive. Internal contradictions, prior versions, and objective corroboration carry greater weight. Where evidence is selectively applied or inconsistently relied upon, credibility erodes. Inconsistency in evidentiary treatment signals bias, confirmation seeking, or outcome fixation. Each weakens the legitimacy of the process. Procedural fairness operates as the third axis of evaluation. Procedural fairness is not defined by formality. It is defined by opportunity. The central inquiry is whether the employee was afforded a reasonable and meaningful opportunity to respond before a final decision was taken. Notification of allegations must be intelligible. The employee must understand the case to be met. Time to prepare must be reasonable. Assistance must be permitted where the framework provides for it. These are not ornamental safeguards. They are functional requirements. Procedural deviations are not assessed mechanically. Decision-makers examine whether the deviation caused material prejudice. Minor irregularities do not invalidate outcomes. Material prejudice does. However, where procedures are embedded in collective agreements, tolerance disappears. Collectively agreed procedures take precedence. They must be followed strictly. Deviation from binding procedures is treated as a jurisdictional defect. The outcome collapses regardless of the strength of the underlying misconduct. This is because authority in such cases is derived from compliance with the agreed system, not managerial discretion. Sanction assessment follows the same structural logic. Decision-makers do not substitute their own preference for discipline. They evaluate proportionality. The gravity of the misconduct, the nature of the role, and the actual or potential harm are weighed together. Dismissal is recognized as a measure of last resort. It is reserved for conduct that renders the continuation of the employment relationship intolerable. Where dismissal is imposed inconsistently or prematurely, legitimacy fails. Across these dimensions, a single pattern emerges. Disciplinary authority is not persuasive. It is procedural. It does not depend on explanation. It depends on predictability. It does not rely on justification after the fact. It relies on coherence before the fact. Consistency therefore functions not as rhetoric, but as evidence. Evidence that the system is stable. Evidence that discretion is bounded. Evidence that outcomes are not improvised. Where such evidence exists, intervention recedes. Where it does not, authority dissolves. This is how consistency operates in labor adjudication. Not as fairness language, but as proof.